Egg Harbor Township in South Jersey isn't the glitzy boardwalk of Atlantic City, but it's close enough to see the neon glow on a humid summer night. It sits on the edge of the sprawling New Jersey Pine Barrens, a landscape filled with dense scrub pines, sandy soil, and winding back roads. It's beautiful, but it's also a place where it's very easy to disappear. There are quiet, residential pockets like Bargain Town or Scullyville, side by side with bustling commercial corridors and the FAA Tech Center. It's a town of commuters, casino workers, and families that have been there for generations. In May, the air starts to get heavy with a specific South Jersey humidity, a mix of salt spray from the ocean and the scent of damp pine needles from the barrens. It's the sweet spot where locals feel like they own the town before the summer crowds descend. People are opening up their windows, getting the patio furniture out, and maybe heading over to Storybook Land or hitting the local ball fields.
The boardwalks in Atlantic City are testing their lights, and the marinas in Egg Harbor are buzzing with people. They're getting their boats ready for the great Egg Harbor Bay. It's supposed to be the beginning of the good times.
Specifically in 2012, Egg Harbor saw a warm early spring. It was a clear, bright Thursday morning when the 911 call came in, and it changed the whole community in Atlantic County for years. This is the story of April Christine Kauffman. I'm Ashley.
I'm Ricky.
And you are listening to Crime Salad. April Christine was born on October 27, 1964, in Atlantic City, and she was a lifelong shore resident, deeply rooted in South Jersey and known by many. According to the press of Atlantic City, she was the oldest of 5 children and the only one her mother did not place into the foster care system. So in 1973, at the age of 9, she watched a social worker take her 4 siblings away from her Absecon home, and it took her 23 years. But in 1996, she found all of them again, scattered across New Jersey, California, and West Virginia. She was raised by her grandmother, and even from that childhood, April built a life that kept her constantly connected to people. She wasn't someone who just stayed in the background, but was instead someone who was outspoken, driven, and very much a presence in her community. One of the ways that April made herself known in her community was through her entrepreneurial spirit, her ownership of Artistic Salon in Northfield, a hair salon which was a central hub for local information and also community connection. It served as a base for April's many social and professional networks. She also ran Jack Purveyor's catering company. In 2010, according to Atlantic City Weekly, she expanded her food business by opening Cherry Cafe and catering in Northfield. She specialized in high-quality catering for local events, corporate lunches, and private parties, using her social abilities to welcome local political and charitable functions.
And with just those businesses, anyone could see that April was a pillar in her community.
And if that wasn't enough, what really set April apart was her voice. Literally, she became a well-known radio personality on WOND 1400 AM, hosting a weekly talk show where she shared her opinions, spoke on community issues, and connected with listeners across the region. She wasn't afraid to say exactly what she thought, and people respected her for it. She wasn't trying to please everyone. She had strong opinions, and she stood by them. And in a small community like that, that kind of personality makes you memorable. But she was also deeply compassionate and kind. As her childhood friends described, April could definitely piss people off, and she had a knack for telling people to go to hell and make them look forward to the trip. Somehow, that honestly didn't push them away, but drew them in. The radio show became the top of the funnel for her other businesses, since people who heard her on the radio would visit her salon or hire her for her catering company because they felt like they knew her personally. From these ventures, April experienced great success. She was busy, had her hands in everything, and was a connector. She had a pulse on every corner of Egg Harbor Township and Northfield. She was connecting to women in the community through her salon, and she was feeding local events through her catering company. And WOND let her reach the entire county through her bold personality. She was heavily involved with the Wounded Warrior Project, which focused on the transition of veterans returning from Iraq, specifically those dealing with invisible wounds like PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. On her show, she would frequently interview veterans, giving them a space to share their stories, using her Jersey grit to demand better services for them, often putting local politicians on the spot to support WWP initiatives. She even hosted events at Artistic Salon, where a portion of the day's proceeds would go directly to the WWP. April also created programs to support those who had served. One of those efforts was the Vet and Vets program. It was tied to the National Corvette Museum in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which, according to her obituary in the press of Atlantic City, April was responsible for establishing. It brought Corvette owners together to raise money for veteran causes and helped launch Wounded Warrior events at the museum. And she also opened her home during those holidays, hosting Thanksgiving dinners for Coast Guard recruits from the Cape May Training Center through a program called Operation Fireside, making sure that even those far from home had somewhere to go for the holidays. And on top of that, she served on the board for the Southern New Jersey chapter of the American Red Cross for blood drives and emergency relief fundraisers. And she also worked with Toys for Kids, a local effort to make sure that no child in Atlantic County went without a gift during the holiday season.
Her impact was significant enough that on May 8th of 2012, then Governor Chris Christie presented her with the New Jersey Governor's Jefferson Award for Public Service, an honor sometimes described as the Nobel Prize for Public Service. It recognized April's ability to mobilize thousands of others to step up for their community. That award was presented just 2 days before she was killed.
April was, according to friends and family, a princess, but also a bulldog. She had beautiful eyes, blonde hair, and a sweet smile, but she also drove a cherry red Corvette and rode a black Harley, things that matched her bold personality. And she had a family who she was close to, including her daughter Kimberly, her 2 grandsons, and her husband, Dr. James Kauffman. April met Jim through her work with veterans, with James telling stories about serving as a Green Beret during the Vietnam War, and the two connected over their shared passions for supporting military members. Jim became her 3rd husband, and according to ABC News and the book Dr. Dealer, they were married on Valentine's Day in 2003, and together they built a life in Linwood, New Jersey, which is where people moved to escape the tourist noise but stay close enough to the shore.
It's a town of manicured lawns, colonial-style homes, and a legendary bike path. It consistently ranks as one of the best and most expensive places to live in New Jersey. It was a perfect place for a successful business owner and a high-performing endocrinologist like Dr. Kauffman. From the outside, they were like a power couple in their community. A strong, outspoken woman, a respected doctor, both involved.
And by early 2012, April was at the height of her life, recognized for her service, surrounded by family, and deeply embedded in her community. But behind that public image, there were layers to her life that most people didn't see. And in May of 2012, everything came to a sudden and violent end inside the home that she shared with her husband. The morning of May 10th started like any other morning in Linwood, New Jersey. The neighborhoods were calm, and nothing like this was supposed to happen. But inside the Kauffman home on Woodstock Drive, something had already gone terribly wrong. Late that morning, a 911 call came into the local police station. On the other end of the line was the Kauffman's handyman, who had reportedly helped April care for her collection of exotic birds. And he urgently was trying to make sense of what he was seeing, saying that his boss was on the floor of her bedroom unresponsive. She had been shot twice, lying face down on the floor, and the door had been left unlocked. One of the bullets shattered her elbow, and the other tore through her side, passing through a lung, her heart, and then her other lung. According to the book Dr. Dealer, the medical examiner believed April may have initially survived the shooting, speculating that she struggled out of the bed after being shot, before ultimately collapsing onto the floor. And when first responders arrived at the scene, they quickly confirmed that April Christine had tragically died in her bedroom, shot twice. This completely shocked the affluent neighborhood that she came from, where a murder was unheard of, and also devastated the ones that she had such a positive impact on. There was no sign of forced entry, nothing had been stolen, there were no fingerprints or shell casings or any clear indication of how someone got in or got out. And it was as if whoever had done this had vanished without a trace, leaving everyone wondering what happened and who could have done this. Because of that, detectives did what they always do first. They look at the person closest to her and was with her that morning, her husband, prominent endocrinologist Dr. James Kauffman. But almost immediately, Jim was ruled out. He told investigators that he had left early that morning for work and completed his normal morning routine. According to reporting from the Press of Atlantic City, he stopped at a nearby Wawa, like he always does, and he arrived at work at his normal time. And when detectives checked on this storyline, his story held up. There was surveillance footage placing him at the Wawa and at his office, and phone records confirmed his movements throughout the day. His alibi was solid, and he could securely be ruled out.
At the time, Jim was perceived as a recognizable, upstanding figure. He was a physician who specialized in treating patients with diabetes, often speaking publicly about health, diet, and lifestyle. And he was known for presenting himself well, as polished, together, and confident. He owned multiple properties, including his home in Linwood and a vacation home in Arizona. He enjoyed hobbies like motorcycle riding and shooting and spent time at firing ranges and skeet shooting. At the time of April's death, she was 47 years old, while he was 62. Their relationship stood out, with April described as a vibrant, striking blonde presence that contrasted with Jim's more reserved professional image, and they connected over their interests and respect for service members.
Meanwhile, news of April's death spread quickly through the community. For those who knew her, it was almost impossible to process. Her fellow radio host, Harry Hurley, told the Press of Atlantic City that April did the work of 100 people. It cannot be replaced. And he could not think of anyone who would want to do her harm, because all she had ever done was help people. It left an emptiness that reflected just how much April meant to the people around her. U.S. Senator Robert Menendez released a statement praising her tireless work on behalf of veterans and the difference she made in so many lives. Even though April pressured government officials to act, no one could deny the positive impact she had in every aspect of her life. It left everyone wondering who would want April dead. Someone who was publicly recognized for doing good. Someone who people truly cared about. And to answer that question, Jim, April's husband, offered something unexpected, suggesting that investigators should look into the Pagans Motorcycle Club. He told them that April may have crossed paths with members of the group through her work with veterans who may have had connections inside the group, which was immediately alarming. The FBI and Department of Justice have long classified the Pagans as one of the major outlaw motorcycle gangs operating on the East Coast, alongside groups like the Hells Angels, the Outlaws, and the Bandidos. According to Department of Justice reporting, the Pagans have been tied to organized crime involving methamphetamine, cocaine, and PCP distribution, as well as racketeering, extortion, and violence for hire.
Racketeering is the act of operating an illegal business or using a legitimate business to commit crimes. So, using a restaurant as a way to buy and sell drugs, for example. Extortion is basically getting money, property, or anything else by intimidating someone through threats of violence, property damage, or social ruin. And contract violence is violence for hire, paying someone or being paid to commit violence against someone or worse.
Many have described this gang as one of the toughest and most violent groups on the East Coast. So if April became involved with them somehow through her work with veterans, it would have been a huge problem. According to law enforcement accounts, women have not traditionally been viewed as equals inside clubs like this. So because of that, detectives had to consider the possibility that April, who was outspoken and unafraid to challenge people, may have said something to the wrong person. This introduced the early theory that instead of this being random, it was retaliation. In the days following April's murder, the community didn't stay quiet. They organized candlelight vigils, events, and her colleagues at the radio station pushed authorities to stay focused on the case. Local newspapers continued to cover her story again and again, hoping that detectives would give some kind of update or a swift arrest to solve the case. But despite all of that, nothing seemed to move forward as police remained extremely private about their investigation. Months passed, and still no arrests or answers surfaced in the case. And by May of 2013, nearly a year had passed since April Christine was tragically murdered, with no justice in sight. Despite the public pressure, the media coverage, and the community demanding answers, the case had gone cold. There were no arrests, clear suspects, or any indication that an indictment was coming. But for April's daughter, Kimberly, standing still wasn't an option. She believed that she knew exactly who was responsible, and she was determined to prove it. So she walked into a law office, Darcy Johnson Day, looking for help. She had already been turned away by a major Philadelphia firm, and she knew that even though it wouldn't be easy, she refused to quit. When she sat down with the attorneys, she didn't hesitate. She believed her stepfather murdered her mother, and she needed help proving it. She had been suspicious of Jim from the very start, even though on the outside their marriage had been seemingly like a power couple, and even Kimberly would agree that they had some really fun times. There were warning signs. According to Kimberly, speaking later to the Oxygen series Killer Motive, everything that the public saw wasn't always what was going on behind the scenes. There was an incident where Jim had actually pushed April down the stairs.
On top of that, according to Killer Motive, Jim missed a community vigil a month after April's murder, soon brought up dating again, and then sold all of April's possessions without telling Kimberly.
So when Kimberly was notified that Jim was eligible for April's $600,000 life insurance policy, she immediately considered it a possible motive and wanted to contest the payout. The attorneys were hesitant at first. Jim Kauffman was a respected doctor in the community, and it wasn't an accusation that people would take lightly. But after hearing her out, reviewing what she had to say, and with the support of their firm, they decided to take the case, and their approach was strategic. Since at that point the criminal investigation wasn't moving forward, instead they turned to civil court. The prosecutor's office appeared to be at a standstill with no sign that charges were coming, and since Jim had sought life insurance money following April's death, that opened the door for litigation. Even though April had named James as the beneficiary, Transamerica Life Insurance told James that the policies could not be paid without official verification that he was not considered a suspect in his wife's death. And in response, James Kauffman sued the company, charging breach of contract for not paying out the two policies which have no clause relating to homicide. It also said there is no state requirement that the copy of the police report be submitted in such cases as the company requested. But Transamerica countered that it could not pay out the policy without assurance that James wasn't involved, and it suggested the secondary beneficiary, Kimberly, should be included in the suit. So the legal team got to work and started to dig deeper into Jim Kauffman's background. Jim Kauffman liked to show the world that he had a tough exterior, referring to his experience with the elite Green Beret Army unit and 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He would sometimes show up in Army fatigues and a beret while supporting April's veteran advocacy programs. He occasionally filled in on or co-hosted her radio show, telling detailed stories about how his unit had come under vicious attack by the Viet Cong, and about how he had been one of the few to survive, licking water off leaves as he struggled to make his way out of the jungle. But what Kimberly's legal team uncovered was that there was no record that he had ever served in the U.S. military at all. All of his stories of hardships were lies. And for Kimberly, who thought her stepfather was a war hero, was disgusted at these findings, wondering what else he could be hiding. Through her attorneys at Darcy Johnson Day, Kimberly formally stepped into the fight to protect her rights and challenge what she believed was deeply wrong. And at the same time, her legal team began conducting their own large-scale investigation, independent of law enforcement. They even issued a public call to the community, asking anyone with information about April's murder to come forward through a dedicated tip line. Alongside that legal action, Kimberly made a public statement, one that made her position extremely clear. She said that not a day goes by when she does not think about her mother, miss her terribly, and wish that charges were filed against the individual responsible. Being brought into the lawsuit by her stepfather left her with no choice but to speak out, and she could no longer sit back in silence. She felt a responsibility to both herself and her mother, who wouldn't have wanted her to be silent any longer.
Kimberly acknowledged the public support, thanking members of the community for the love they had shown her family. But she also asked that all future questions be directed to her attorneys while the case was ongoing. She hoped that one day criminal justice would be served, and everyone else hoped for that too.
May of 2014, it marked 2 years of injustice, and April's friends and family still weren't staying quiet. They held vigils, and they invited people to bring a new toy or a gift card to benefit local veteran families, in true April spirit. Meanwhile, prosecutors from the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office were filing motions to prevent the release of specific investigative documents to Kimberly's legal team. They were particularly concerned about protecting the identities of confidential informants and witnesses who had provided information about the case so far. The state argued that if witness names or informant details were released, it would make other people afraid to come forward in what was already a high-pressure, high-profile investigation involving potential organized crime ties through the Pagan Motorcycle Club. But the fight continued on. Kimberly wasn't willing to keep going without answers. About 3 years since April was murdered, the organizer of the Justice for April Facebook page started a petition to demand the Atlantic County prosecutor and the state of New Jersey to actively investigate and charge her killer with the murder of their beloved friend and advocate, pressuring then Governor Chris Christine, Atlantic County Prosecutor James McLean, and the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice Director Ellie Honig. By 2017, the legal battle over the life insurance policy marched on between Kimberly and Jim Kauffman, as Kimberly's mother's home went up for auction, with still no answers in the criminal investigation. And although police determined early that it was not a random killing, their expectations of making a fast arrest never happened. The investigation grew cold until a new prosecutor, Damon Tyner, sworn into the office early in 2017, began looking at old unsolved murder case files. And he almost immediately filed a demand that Dr. Kauffman submit his DNA for use in the probe.
According to ABC News, there was little left from the original 2012 investigation, and the new prosecutor ordered a top-to-bottom review from the ground up. This was a huge relief to Kimberly and the veteran community who had been so affected by April's death, excited that the case was finally being treated with the urgency that it deserved.
And that urgency paid off. It was on June 13th, 2017, this is 5 years after April's murder, a combined task force of FBI agents, Atlantic County prosecutors, detectives, And local police executed search warrants at Dr. Kauffman's medical office in Egg Harbor Township and also at his home. And when detectives arrived at his endocrinology practice, Dr. Kauffman brandished a 9mm Ruger handgun, pointing the gun at himself and shouting that he wasn't going to jail. So what originally was meant to be a simple search warrant execution turned into a lengthy standoff as authorities were forced to bring in a hostage negotiator and establish a perimeter around the office while keeping their weapons drawn. After being talked down by a negotiator, Kauffman surrendered peacefully, and he was initially taken to a psychiatric intervention facility. So during the raid, investigators discovered that James was an extensive gun collector, legally owning approximately 100 firearms. However, he was charged with several weapons offenses related to that, including possession of hollow point bullets.
Hollow point bullets are designed to expand upon impact, which increases the surface area of the bullet and causes massive tissue damage. It also stops the bullet's forward momentum. Since New Jersey has some of the strictest ammunition laws in the country, you can legally buy hollow points and keep them in your home or transport them to a shooting range. But it's a crime to possess them under circumstances not manifestly appropriate. If you're caught carrying them in public, in a concealed weapon, or in Dr. Kauffman's case, during the commission of another crime, like obstructing justice or standoff, they become illegal.
Prosecutors also found a large amount of cash inside the doctor's office. Some records state that it was over a couple $100,000. However, the specific warrant details were sealed. At the time of the arrest, the prosecutor Damon Tyner stated that the search warrants were unrelated to the 2012 homicide. But it didn't take long before the details of the case came to light. Jim was actually being accused of medical fraud, allegedly ordering unnecessary blood tests, prescribing unnecessary compounded medications, ordering heart testing, and accepting thousands of dollars every month in kickbacks, which is a form of negotiated bribery where someone pays a commission for facilitating a false transaction or service. Since he was arrested for a weapons violation, investigators were able to access his phone records. And from there, everything changed when they saw that Jim Kauffman was in contact with leadership of the Pagans Motorcycle Club, the same club that James originally pointed police to right after April's death. Police determined from there that Jim was part of a drug ring, allegedly supplying OxyContin to members of the Pagans so they could sell it on the street. Immediately, this gave another motive for April's murder. She uncovered her husband's double life and threatened him with divorce and exposure, giving both Jim and the Pagans motive to end her life. When Jim realized that investigators were finally onto him, according to reporting from the press of Atlantic City, he tried to cooperate with authorities, providing information that pointed back toward the Pagans. Members of the club then came forward to say that Jim was supplying them with drugs and wanted his wife murdered. In the years following April's murder, it appeared to the public that nothing was happening, but behind the scenes, Kimberly Pack and her legal team were quietly building a case against James Kauffman. They weren't just defending Kimberly's rights in the life insurance case, they were actively investigating April's murder, filing a wrongful death lawsuit against James Kauffman. And through the civil justice system, they conducted interviews, reviewed hundreds of pages of phone records, text messages, emails, photographs, and documents, and they even carried out videotape depositions, including one from James Kauffman himself. Their investigation was extensive and exhausting as they were engaged in a prolonged battle with the county prosecutor's office over access to investigative materials, and all the while, Kimberly kept pushing, asking questions, and demanding answers for her mother. The teams said that as they uncovered information, they turned it over to law enforcement. But according to them, it seemed to fall on deaf ears. But they kept going. According to their findings, April and Jim's relationship was extremely volatile, describing greed as a major factor in Jim's personality. They also reinforced that Jim was not afraid to lie, including to decorate himself as a Green Beret despite never having served in the military at all. But one of the most significant discoveries came from phone records, revealing hundreds of calls between Dr. Kauffman and a burner phone. These calls went on for 8 months and then suddenly stopped the evening before April was murdered. Their investigation also uncovered the strange relationship between Dr. Kauffman and the Pagans Motorcycle Club, including the sale of opioid prescriptions for cash. So as authorities combined these findings with their medical malpractice suspicions, the search warrants continued. One of those locations was a luxury condo in Philadelphia, co-owned by Jim and the home of his mother, looking for financial records, cash, or additional weapons that may have been stored outside his primary residence. And in response to all of this, the New Jersey State Board of Medical Examiners issued an emergency order to suspend Dr. James Kauffman's license to practice medicine and surgery. The board cited the standoff at his office as the primary reason, arguing that his behavior demonstrated that he was incapable of safely practicing medicine and posed a clear and imminent danger to the public.
The suspension was temporary pending a full hearing, but it effectively shuttered his endocrinology practice immediately. It also stripped him of his ability to prescribe medications, which was significant given the investigation into his pill mill operations with the Pagans.
At this time, Jim's attorney argued that the suspension was premature. He said the standoff was the result of extraordinary stress, not a reflection of Jim's medical competence. The argument didn't slow anything down. The fight continued. On January 9th of 2018, Atlantic County Prosecutor Damon Tyner, he stood in front of reporters and announced that Dr. James Kauffman had been charged, along with Ferdinand Augello and 6 others who were in connection with April's murder, and an underlying drug enterprise. 8 people in total. And according to prosecutors, this wasn't a random act of violence. This was murder for hire. And the person who ordered it was April's own husband. It all started in 2011. Jim Kauffman was running an opioid pipeline out of his Egg Harbor Township medical practice alongside members of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. And at some point that year, April found out. And she told him she wanted a divorce. She told him she planned to spend every dollar she could get her hands on until it was finalized. She also threatened to expose the drug operation.
So from Jim's perspective, he's looking at losing his marriage, his money, and his medical license all at once.
Prosecutors identified Ferdinand Augello as the leader of the drug network. This was a former Pagans chapter president. And according to their findings, Jim and Augello started looking for someone to kill April. Tyner said that Jim's own words were that he would rather kill April than go through a divorce.
Quote, and lose half of his empire.
And it took nearly a year to find someone willing to do it. That person was Francis Mulholland, a local man, a heroin addict, and an associate of the drug ring. The plan was simple. Jim would leave the door unlocked when he left for work. Mulholland would be driven to the house, walk in, and shoot April while she was asleep in her bedroom. Now, according to Tyner, Mulholland was paid at least $20,000 in cash, though investigators believed that real number was higher.
And Francis Mulholland never faced charges for any of this. He died of what was ruled an accidental overdose in October of 2013, about 18 months after the murder, years before anyone was arrested. Jim, meanwhile, kept the drug operation running for 5 more years. It only ended when he was arrested in June of 2017 on those weapons charges.
So, on January 9th of 2018, Jim was charged. He moved 2 days later from the Atlantic County Jail to the Hudson County Jail in Kearney. Prosecutor Tyner said that the transfer was for Jim's safety because Augello, who was being held in Atlantic County, had allegedly already begun plotting to have Jim killed in jail before he could talk. But Jim never did talk, and he never stood trial, because on January 26th of 2018, 17 days after being charged, Jim Kauffman was found dead in his cell, hanged with a strip of bedsheet. Authorities called it a carefully planned suicide, and he even left behind a 6-page letter addressing to his third wife and his attorneys, and in it he denied killing April. He claimed Augello had approached him 3 years after the murder and confessed that he, Mulholland, and a driver had done it. And he signed the note JMK MD, even though Jim was a doctor of osteopathy, ADO, not an MD, a title he had used correctly for his entire career.
Which, depending who you ask, was either a mistake from a man in crisis or a detail worth paying attention to.
Now, for April's daughter, Kimberly Pack, she would never get to sit across from her stepfather in a courtroom. She would never get to hear him answer for what prosecutors said he did. The man she had spent 6 years accusing had taken that away from her, too.
As the family tried to make sense of a closure that was stolen from them, questions kept surfacing about the original investigation, about what they had found, what had been missed, and what had been quietly set aside.
And the clearest example of this came from reporting by Breaking AC in 2018. Just days after April's murder in 2012, the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office quietly reached out to Dr. Michael Baden. For context, Baden is one of the most high-profile medical examiners in the country. He's the former chief medical examiner of New York City. He reviewed autopsies of JFK and Martin Luther King Jr., and more recently, George Floyd and Jeffrey Epstein. And he also hosted the HBO series Autopsy. When he weighs in on a case, people listen.
So the question becomes, what were they asking him to look at? And why didn't anyone know about it until 6 years later?
On June 15, 2012, Baden sent his reply. He had reviewed the evidence, the body stiffness, the blood pooling, a body temperature of 86 degrees when April was first examined at 1:10 in the afternoon, an elevated potassium level in her eye fluids, an empty stomach and bladder at autopsy. To a reasonable degree of medical certainty, Baden concluded that April died at approximately 2:10 in the morning. Now, what's interesting about that, Jim Kauffman told investigators that he left the house for work at around 5:30 that morning. This was his routine every weekday, the 2-mile drive to Shore Medical Center in Summers Point. Ricky's part. Yeah. And Baden sent this letter to John Maher. This would be the chief assistant prosecutor overseeing the investigation. And Maher, in his own affidavit, wrote that Baden's findings clearly contradict Mr. Kauffman's statement that he saw April sleeping as he left their home at around 5:30 a.m. So the prosecutor's office had it in writing from one of the country's most respected pathologists, documented internally by their own chief assistant prosecutor, that the husband's story did not line up with the science.
And then, for the next 6 years, nothing.
Now, the prosecutor's office never publicly acknowledged that Baden had been consulted. They never acknowledged his conclusion. The letter only surfaced when a Breaking AC reporter filed an open records request in 2018.
And when Breaking AC filed that request, the office confirmed that the letter existed, but no contract, no invoice, no record of payment. On paper, Baden was never officially retained at all.
Which leaves an uncomfortable question hanging. Why would one of the highest profile pathologists in the country weigh in on a local murder case, deliver a conclusion that placed the victim's death inside the home while the husband was still there, and then disappear from the record for 6 years? Technically, this case is closed. Ferdinand Augello is serving 30 years for April's murder, plus a life sentence on federal drug charges. The 5 other co-defendants from the drug ring took plea deals. Francis Mulholland, the man who pulled the trigger, died of an overdose before he could ever be charged. And Jim Kauffman, the husband, prosecutors said orchestrated the whole thing, died in a jail cell before he ever stood trial. So on paper, the people responsible for what happened to April on May 10th, 2012 have been accounted for. But if you ask Kimberly Pack, April's daughter, if that feels like justice, the answer is complicated. Because 6 years went by while Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office sat on a letter from one of the country's most respected pathologists. 6 years, while Kimberly and her attorneys ran their own investigation out of a civil courtroom because the criminal one had gone quiet. 6 years of being told that the case was active while a document that directly contradicted her stepfather's alibi sat in a file somewhere. And then, after the convictions, 3 employees of the same prosecutor's office filed a formal complaint accusing the prosecutor who brought the charges of hiding evidence, protecting friends, and looking the other way when detectives on the case were accused of misconduct.
The people who killed April have been named. That part's done. But the question of who else failed her and whether they'll ever answer for it, that one's still open.
Kimberly has taken what happened to her mother and turned it into advocacy work, helping other victims navigate the system she spent 6 years fighting against. April's friends and the veterans she championed still gather every year at American Legion Post 352 in Summers Point for the April Christine Kauffman Veterans Advocate Award. The Justice for April Kauffman community is still active online, and the website her family runs, aprilkaufman.net, is still up. Because the people who loved April understood something early on, the legal system was going to do what it was going to do on its own timeline for its own reasons. But keeping her name alive, keeping her work alive, that part was up to them.
If you want to follow along with the ongoing work in April's name, check out the Justice for April Kauffman Facebook page and aprilkaufman.net. And if you're in Atlantic County and want to support the veterans organizations April spent her life fighting for, American Legion Post 352 is a good place to start.
And if you would like to support Crime Salad, the best way is to head over to patreon.com/Crime Salad Podcast, where you can get ad-free listens and be a part of our community. And you can also grab some merch at crimesaladpodcast.dashery.com. We'll have the links in our description.
Thank you guys so much for listening.
Stay safe, everyone. Until next time.